when you talk about dead people. And if you're a professor of history, they don't like it if you do any numbers except for page numbers. And so it turns out that going between the two, walking across the street between the economics department and the history department, is actually not the same experience as being a member of a department of economic history, as I now am in Sweden. And I'm telling you, it's great to be with economic historians. They're my people. Yes! In fact, I would go further. I would say that relative to economics, let's just talk about that side of it. Economic history is the scientific branch of economics. I am using science in a congratulatory sense. We get the facts. We don't get the data. I was arguing this afternoon, persuading Jan Lautner this afternoon. We shouldn't call it data, which means in Latin, things given. Because we economic historians don't take the facts as given. We go out and we seize the facts. So we should stop calling it data. We should call them kappa. Things seized. That's what we do. Now, the main fact that we know, and the people outside this room don't, is the most important secular event in human history. And we call it the Industrial Revolution. And it's not just a one-time event, it seems to be a permanent change in the human condition. If I was doing this talk in the absence of the most important event in the last 40 years, which is not the Great Recession, as unpleasant as it's been, but economic growth in China and India, it would be harder to make the case that you're going to make this afternoon. It's terribly important that this industrial revolution has gotten out of northwestern Europe, where it started, and has spread rather easily, all things considered, to the rest of the world. I know we're on the African continent, which I love. I especially love from South Africa. And it seems that Africa is going to be, it's hard for it to get into the Industrial Revolution. But with South Africa leading the way, I think in the next 50 years, there's no reason that the whole African continent can't become developed. So this remarkable change in the human condition is expressed by our people in this room, our version of the hockey stick. You know, I don't mean a field hockey stick where it curves back, but an ice hockey stick. This is, of course, an expression particularly favored by Canadians. If we think of all human history as being measured from here to the other one of whatever this box is, and this is zero. Since I have arthritis, I can't get down too much. This is zero. This is $3 a day. This is the invention of language. Again, in South Africa, I have to point out, at least Southeast Africa. Say 120,000 years ago. As far as we can tell, it looks like that's about when full human language is developed. developed that spreads out of Africa. Okay, here we are, $3 a day. Now, my finger, don't try this at home, my finger has a magical quality of being able to do scientific diagrams very accurately. So this is $3 a day, $3 a day. Why $3 a day? Because that's roughly subsistence. And no human civilization has gotten much above subsistence. By the time we get to 1800, in Holland, in England, parts of China, and so on, we get to, well, $6 a day. $3 a day in current dollars is not much. $3 a day is 3/4 of a cappuccino and nothing else. No education, no anything else. And as my mom says, she's 90 years old, $6 a day, twice that, which is what on the eve of industrialization we could achieve maximally in the best organized societies on earth. $6 a day, as my mother says, is no bag of bluebirds either. Why a bag of bluebirds is a desirable thing, I don't know. That's her expression. So here we go. $3 a day, $3 a day, $3 a day. People start coming out of Africa about here. Everyone here is Africa. Australia is settled, but here we are. Now we have the agricultural revolution. Up, but down. Malthusian grounds. It's a nice irony that Malthus wrote in 1798, just at the time when his explanation became obsolete. It's dangerous to put forward scientific hypotheses if in the next year they come to be untrue. And here we are at 1800. Then things change. You have to watch very carefully if you hear this. It's quite important. It goes, whoosh. That's the science. Whoosh. It's the sharp upward jump to about $100 a day, conservatively. And that's one of our main discoveries. That going from $3 a day to $100 a day, or if you measure quality correctly, if you include improvements in medicine, going to a doctor in 1800 was a very bad idea. Going to university in 1800 wasn't such a good idea either, because what we know has improved, what we teach has improved. Think about how much economics has improved since 1800. It has. You can be cynical about it. But it has improved since 1800. Astronomy has improved. The study of literature has improved. The study of philosophy. So even a university education is worse than it was in 1800. And the price indexes of correcting for quality don't adequately reflect improvement of quality. My favorite example of this is kind of crazy. It's tires. Automobile tires. The older males here will have, in their youth, fixed a lot of tires. Isn't that true, Price? Price is the only exception in the room. He's what you'd call an outlier in a lot of ways. But I remember, every 5,000 miles or so, my tires would fail. I'd have to go to the garage if I could get there, or fix it myself. Oh, he just buys them. Even then, he was rich. That's why it's called price. So, whereas now, tires last 40,000 miles. They actually do. They just go on forever. If they get a puncture, they repair themselves. Elves come in the middle of the night. It's mysterious. But that is just one example of numerous examples of how the price index for, say, television sets can't reflect the actual increase in quality. So it's even more than, it's $3 a day to $200 a day or $300 a day equivalent expenditure for reduction. Now that's a terribly important fact for everyone in this room to teach their students and to write articles about it in the newspaper and so on. Because, you know, I was speaking to someone in Australia the other day where I came here from a 27-hour flight, and I'm incoherent, you can blame that. And she was saying, well, yeah, but surely there were other times when people did very well. The glory that was Greece, the grandeur that was Rome, the Song dynasty in China. Surely they were just as well off as we are. And that's because we haven't in this room taught them that that's just not so. As wonderful as it was for the Song or the Greeks, still most people were very poor. And most people could get 3/4 of the cappuccino. Now, this central fact of our glorious discipline constrains the explanations we can give of it. Its magnitude constrains it. If instead of a factor of 33 to, 100, the increase had been, 100% or 200%, instead of, 1,900% or 9,000%. If it had been one of those low numbers, 100% or 200%, then routine economic explanations would work. Saving, investment, exploitation, imperialism. My favorite source of historical insight for England is a book called 1066 and All That, which everyone here should read if they like English history. And there they speak of the Industrial Revolution, which all the rich men in England discovered that women and children could work 25 hours a day without becoming excessively deformed. And that's the exploitation argument. None of those routine explanations, routine economic explanations, work if we're talking about that much of an increase. You understand what I mean? Here's a way of putting it. The economists, the highly technically trained economists in this room will have no trouble with this. The others, well, you'll just have to be patient. Let's draw a production possibility curve. I don't like PowerPoint. I don't use it. So look, here's a production possibility curve. Watch. Let's make this axis food. This axis all other goods. Got a complete model of the economy. Food and all other goods, okay? Now let's draw the per capita production possibility curve for, say, English people in 1800. Per capita. Watch. Food, all other goods. You have to watch this or you're going to miss it. Here it is. Got that? Here it is. Now, what is the per capita production possibility curve in England now? Well, it's this. There's a gigantic increase. Now you might say, well, why can't growth theory explain that? Got growth theory. Friend Bob Solow, student Paul Romer. They got growth theory. It's just a matter of growth. But then the historian clicks in. The historical fact of all this clicks in. Because this constrains us as economists that it only happened once and that it's started happening in the 18th century in northwestern Europe once suggests very strongly that routine savings rates, foreign trade, even human capital accumulation can't initiate. Those can be important for the shape of economic growth, for the kinds of details about the societies we got out of it. But it can't be the motivating force. My analogy for this is the tide. Think of the tide coming in on a beach and estuary and lagoons. The details of the shape of the coastline will determine where exactly the rising tide goes. That's fine. I understand that. That's good. But that's what our economic models can do. They can tell us what the comparative advantage of this country or that will be, and whether the estuary accepts this much salt water or that. But you know, it doesn't explain the time. It explains the patterns that result from the tide. The tide itself has other causes. Now, it's not just the economists who are in trouble because of the scale of the great fact, as I call it. It's enormous. It's also the historians, our colleagues on the other side of the street. The historians are also in trouble because if they're focused on, say, Britain, they're liable to speak of causes that also apply to other countries, other parts of the world, to China, or to South Asia, or the Ottoman Empire. They'll speak of urbanization. All the biggest cities in the world were Chinese. If urbanization, the rise of a big middle class, is all that's necessary to cause modern economic growth, why not China? If a society of high skills, high educational, high ability to read at least, is what's at stake. Tokugawa, Japan in the 18th century should have industrialized. So our ability to tell persuasive stories about why this happened is limited by its uniqueness and its scale. From both the economic side and the economic side. It's customary. My friend Doug North started the customary. Talk in terms of improved property rights as the cause of the Industrial Revolution. And I believe this is a fairy tale. And Doug and his colleagues have gotten it wrong. In fact, Doug has taught economists and others incorrectly on this point. Because what you mean by any society is a society with property rights. If people are stealing from each other all the time and breaking into each other's fields and so on and so forth, you don't have a society at all. So any society is a society of enforced property rights. And something that we in this room can tell and the people outside can't again is that trade has always been, since the caves there has been trade. In South Africa itself, some of the earliest findings of Homo sapien activity find shells, beads, 200 kilometers from the coast. If you're 200 kilometers from the coast, you didn't collect the shells, someone else did. And you traded for the shells. obsidian, which makes very sharp blades. Some of the sharpest blades known since modern times, sharper than anything you can get in stones or even steel, are from this glass, this glass. You can tell exactly where it comes from. And it comes often from hundreds of miles away. So trade is fundamental. Property is fundamental. It can't be that the Industrial Revolution was caused by changing property rights. Even if you didn't already know that property rights didn't change in the glorious revolution, even in the late 17th century. So it's not true, a story which I'm afraid is widely believed among economists, that, oh, I see, once people were cheating all the time and not able to cooperate because there weren't any property rights, then King William came to the throne, and suddenly then there was property rights and we were off to the races. A very similar economic argument that you hear often that makes economists very happy is, yes, patents. Patents of invention. Yes, nice. Make ideas into private property, make inventions into private property, and then investment will take care of it. People will invest in inventions. So you have the machinery of invention all set up. It was the patent system in the 18th century that caused the Industrial Revolution. As Joe O'Keefe has pointed out, this is slightly Potzel. This because a patent in the 18th century was very expensive. Not in the United States as it finally became, but in England it was terribly expensive. Very few inventors actually patented anything. James Watt slowed down, very significantly slowed down the spread of the separate condensers in the steam engine, which he invented, by having a patent on it and fiercely protecting it like the Coca-Cola company does. So patents weren't it. Private property didn't change. That's not the current story. In general, we economists love the story of capital accumulation. Ever since Adam Smith, we've loved the story of capital accumulation because we understand it, because we have it worked out. So we try to drag economic history over under the bright light of capital accumulation. We keep trying to put it, to use another analogy, we keep trying to lie down the most shocking secular event in human history, which is the keep trying to get it to lie down on a Procrustean bed of routine investment. Oh, I see. Marginal benefit, marginal cost, yep, right, same old story. Just invest, marginal efficiency of capital, I got it. But it's not a good story. The savings rates, Rostow's old claim, which was almost immediately contradicted, that a rise in the savings rate was the cause of the Industrial Revolution. All kinds of problems with that. By the way, I should point out that most of what I said here is pause for a commercial announcement. Most of what I say here this afternoon is included in a wonderful book which you can buy on Amazon.com inexpensively, called Bourgeois Dignity, Why Economics Can't Explain the World, the modern world. The savings rate was lower in Britain than in most other countries at a comparable stage of the Industrial Revolution. Great South African and then British economist Charles Feinstein proved that shortly before he died. So it's not high savings rate. In fact, it's our discovery, our economic historians, it's our discovery in the 1950s that the Industrial Revolution was financed by retained earnings. That it's quite false to think, as Marx did, that accumulation disposes on the profits. It's not right. You didn't need masses of capital to start a cotton mill. You needed masses of capital to build a railroad. And in the railway age, masses of capital, joint stock companies and so on were quite necessary, with a capital output ratio of 10 to 1 instead of 2 to 1. But for manufacturing, the other parts of the Industrial Revolution, you earned profits from your bright idea, your non-patented bright idea. For that, you financed expansion. At the same time as that discovery was being made by people like Francois Crouzet in the 1950s, the economists were discovering, that aforementioned Sola and others, Moses Abramovich and so forth, were discovering that capital accumulation doesn't explain increases of income per head. Piling brick on brick is not why we're 30 to 100 times better off than we were in 1800 per head. That's just not it. Piling brick on brick, as Keynes famously pointed out, would drive the marginal product of capital down to zero in a generation if there was no innovation, if there were no new ideas. So the argument is that that it was not savings or exploitation or the Protestant ethic, by the way. Although I'm very persuaded that Max Weber was correct that ideas matter, his particular machine through interpretation of Calvin's theology, which he got wrong, and interpretation of how an economy expands, which he got wrong, is the right explanation. In both cases, he's wrong. And in particular, he's wrong because he was still a student of Marx. We're all students of Marx. Marx was the greatest social scientist of the 19th century, without compare. But he got everything wrong. And among the things he got wrong was the same thing that Adam Smith got wrong, namely that investment, savings, is where it's at. So you're, according to Max Weber, you're a Protestant, you save a lot because you're terrified that you're not among the chosen, and so growth happens. And that's not how growth really happens. The same thing is true, this procrastinating bed that economists want to put things down on, when you move to human capital. Now, obviously, if Europeans had been illiterate completely, we wouldn't have had an industrial revolution. I agree that a certain amount of education is necessary, a certain amount of skill accumulation of various kinds. But lots of other countries have skill accumulations. South Asia was filled with superb craftsmen. So it's not obvious that investment in craft skill is going to cause the. That's not obvious at all. So the causes were not economic. The consequences were economic. The Industrial Revolution, the coastline, the shape of the coastline, but the causes weren't. Even coal. People love coal. They love the coal explanation because in high school they were shown this map of European industrialization on the coal fields. Aha, that's it. It's coal. And I get into arguments with this, probably others of you have, with my colleagues in the physical and biological sciences, because they love the idea that it's a change in the source of energy that caused the Industrial Revolution. I'm not against coal. My best friends are coal miners, but I just don't think it makes a lot of sense. On the western rivers of the United States, the fuel for the steam engines was, of course, wood, not coal. In the early Industrial Revolution, in Italy and in England and in New England, the mode of power was not even steam. It was water power. Coal from Newcastle was as easily sent to Amsterdam as it was sent for centuries to London. China had coal. It wasn't located correctly, but it wasn't located correctly in England either, and people moved. Industrialization happened on the coal fields. Why didn't it happen in Manchuria, and so on and so forth? So economic, geographic determinism doesn't work very well either. So what is it? If you buy this wonderful book and read it carefully every night, a chapter, nice short chapters, then you'll fall asleep halfway through and catch up the next night. If you believe my polite criticism of my colleagues, many of them here, you think I'm right that even if you add up all these causes, it doesn't make a lot of sense because there were lots of other countries, other times, even in Europe. Why not Greece and Rome as the place of the Industrial Revolution? And there's got to be something peculiar to northwestern Europe in the 17th and 18th century. Now, I say that it was ideas, that it was ethics, that it was rhetoric. You know, some of my other work, you won't be surprised. It was what I call acceptance of what I call the bourgeois deal. The bourgeois deal is, you let me make a fortune through creative destruction, like Charlie Parker and jazz. You let me make a fortune, and I'll make you all rich in the long run. The third act. The first act of the capitalist drama, I make it all. Too bad, you're otherwise. That's the GOP, the Republican Party. Have you ever heard of the 2 cow jokes? You ought to go online and find 2 cow jokes. One of the 2 cow jokes is a Republican has 2 cows. His neighbor doesn't have any. What's the problem? But that's only the first act. By the second, third act, the profits are dissipated. They are. They have been over and over again. So that's how creative destruction works. But you have to accept that deal. Don't accept that deal for one reason or another. If you're bourgeois, if you're the member of the Kent, as they say in Dutch, the old bourgeoisie, the upper middle class, and you want to prevent creative destruction from helping the working class, then you create monopolies and you stop innovation. Now, to put it another way, my claim is that there was, so to speak, a bourgeois revaluation. Volume 3 of this great work of 4, I'm hoping for a boxed set like Harry Potter, then we'll die happy. If I get 1/100th of her royalties, I'll die rich. But anyway, a box set of 4 volumes, and volume 3, which I'm working on, should be in draft by Christmas, is an attempt to show that there was what you might call a bourgeois revaluation. It's called The Treasured Bourgeoisie, How Innovation Became Ethical, 1600 to 1848. It's crucial, because it's got to be an ethical change of attitude, a sociological change. Now, those who know my earlier work in economic history will find this very strange coming from my mouth. So I spent the first half of my scientific career in economic history denying sociology. David Landis, my friend and enemy, what nonsense, entrepreneurship, phooey, let's look only at budget lines, that's all we need in life. And I see my Anglican God condemns me to spend the last half of my career denying the first half. So +1 minus 1 equals 0. So I don't know what to do about that. But it's not just culture. That's not perhaps the best takeaway, the best summary of what you've heard this afternoon. Not quite culture. Because it's more superficial than culture. My explanation is superficial, purposely so. It was an accident, so to speak, that conditions were right in northwestern Europe for this change in ideology, this change in how we view innovation, how we thought about our marketing and manufacturing colleagues, how we thought about the market test. That was an ideological change. It could have happened in Japan. It didn't happen in Japan until after the Meiji, the Restoration. It could have happened in China. In fact, it was happening before the Communist Revolution. But since 1978, it has happened. The big change in China was not some change of investment policy of the central government. It was a change in ideology, a change in attitude. I had a few years ago a graduate student from China. We used to call it the mainland. She was, I suppose, I didn't inquire too much, the daughter of some high Communist Party official, because those are the only people who get fellowships. And I asked her once, I was finding her discussion of China somewhat puzzling. I said, what do you think communism is? She said, well, communism is allowing people to start their own businesses, have private property, keep the profits so they can send their daughter to the United States for education, and, market tests. That's what communism is. I said, you're not going to understand the 20th century unless you understand that that's not what most people think of as communism. But that's what the Chinese now think. Same thing happened in India. I have a student who did a very interesting dissertation on the ideological change in India in the 1950s and 60s. In Bollywood, you've heard of Bollywood, all the villains were capitalists or landlords. And all the heroes were police or bureaucrats. Police or bureaucrats would intervene and save the poor villagers and the poor workers from exploitation by these terrible capitalist people. Then in the 70s, well before 1991, when Singh became the finance minister in India, things started to change, the ideology started changing. And the villains in the Bollywood movies became guess who? The police and the bureaucrats. Heroes became landlords are never heroes, but entrepreneurs. So there was an ideological change that preceded these massive, important changes in China and India. It's not a deep European exceptionalism that explains the Industrial Revolution. It's not the ancient traditions of the Germanic people, forests, black forests. It's not Englishmen's freedoms. It's not deep. It's an accident of how northwestern Europe and Europe generally reacted to the crisis of the 17th century. This is a point that a friend, the historical sociologist Jack Goldstone makes. He's right. It was superficial. It was rhetorical. It was a change in how people talked about other people. Not psychological. Not some deep-set change in the character of people. That's not what happened, although maybe that came as a consequence. I don't deny that psychology changes. But what did change is sociology. What changed is, as Tocqueville put it, habits of the heart, more exactly, as I would say, habits of the lip. You can quite properly ask what caused that, oh wise, very new economic historian. For that I say, in volume 3, which you must order in advance so that you get your copy, it comes out in about 2.5 years. The Protestant Reformation, successful, I think, because of the so-called invention of the printing press, although, by the way, it was invented in Korea. Everything before 1700 was invented in the Far East, so you should just get accustomed to that. But what happened was a change in the attitude towards church governance. In the Reformed churches, of which this is an example, Geographic, we say in Dutch. In the Reformed churches, the congregation chose the minister. He was not chosen by a hierarchy. The more extreme forms of Protestantism in the 17th century, English Quakerism, for example, even women could preach. Shocking idea. It was a result, this accident, this change in rhetoric, this change in the dignity, that's my title, bourgeois dignity, in the dignity of ordinary people, in the belief in ordinary people as Matthias expressed it, of having a go, English expression, having a go, feeling that you could start a business. You could invent a new way of making cloth, and so forth. That was reinforced by successful revolts and revolutions, which were put down they happened in Tokugawa, Japan, but they were successfully put down. They happened in the Ottoman Empire, but they were successfully put down. They happened in China, but they were successfully put down. They weren't successfully put down in northwestern Europe. The Dutch fought 80 years against the Spaniards. Remarkably, in the Dutch national anthem, they still talk about their king being Spanish. They're crazy. But still, they for 80 years, they fought and they won. Out of that came the first modern economy. Economies on the frontier between Protestantism and Catholicism were most likely to be successful. So in short, I come to you as an ideational economic historian. haven't gone so far as to adopt Hegel. I'm not old enough to read Hegel. Tried, I still have to wait until I'm old. But I do believe in the force of ideas in economic history. Ideology in economic history. Ideas about each other in economic history. But don't think I'm against quantification. This book, which hasn't got many numbers in it, is highly quantitative because it's all about how big. Not statistically significant, which is rubbish, but how big. How big was the effect of coal? How big was the effect of foreign trade? How big? How big? How big? Quantity. Right? And that remains our central question as economic historians, because unlike our colleagues in history, we use numbers beyond page numbers. And I'm not against economics. I'm not against marginal benefit and marginal cost. They're very nice. And I've written whole books in praise of them. And for seeing the shape of the coastline, for seeing where the rising tide enters and exits as the tide goes back and forth. That we need detailed economics for. Don't think of this as an excuse for not studying the sails. But it's not the core explanation of the greatest secular event. Thank you very much.